Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Jenny Powers, Ph.D., is an accomplished writer, scientist, and athlete. She earned her Ph.D. in microbiology and immunology from the University of Colorado. She is deeply inspired by the exploration of human nature and the study of our ancestors. She is the co-author of the new book on the origin of being, Understanding the Science of Evolution to Enhance Your Quality of Life, a book she wrote with Luke Comer, who we recently hosted on episode 659 of our show. Powers and Comer claim that whenever humans live in accord with their evolutionary design, they are more likely to experience greater physical and psychological health and a good life. Through meticulous research, the authors trace our evolution from single cell organisms all the way to modern humans, showing the origins of many of our behaviors. They show how modernity tends to disrupt those behaviors and explain how you can reclaim your primal self, even as you enjoy the benefits of the modern world and a life of health, well being, and the fuller expression of our humanity. Jenny's journey as a collegiate basketball player also taught her to push physical boundaries and also to expand her intellectual horizons. Jenny Powers, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate both having Luke and I on. That feels very, very special.
Well, that's great. We're so honored to have you on. We had a great conversation with Luke. It was really fun to chat with him, and he recommended that we get on the horn with you and definitely host you as well. And so we didn't hesitate at all. You guys very kindly sent me your book, which I really enjoyed. I love the style that you guys wrote it in. So
Good.
I'm really looking forward to kind of getting your side of things, how you got mixed up in the project, and yeah, I'm really excited to chat about our content for today. I do want to point out that you just live on the opposite side of the mountains that I do. You're on the other side of the Rocky Mountains in
Right.
Colorado, in a place that we just were a few weeks ago. You said you live about 10 minutes away from Red Rocks, where the amphitheater is.
That's correct. Yeah. And sometimes when we go outside, if the wind is right, you can tell who's playing there because
Interesting.
you can actually hear the music. It's that loud. So it's kind of
Wow.
neat.
Wow, that's very loud. I was going to say, depending on the direction of the wind, you could probably tell a lot of other things by the sense of smell, depending on who's playing the concert there. Um, have you have you done a concert there?
I've been to many concerts there.
Many.
And I also, every summer they have film at Red Rocks. So they have like a local band opening. So
Uh,
they get the exposure and get to play at Red Rocks. And then they play like The Princess Bride or
uh,
Goonies or something like that. And so it's just really fun family thing to go to as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I don't know what it is about Utah, but everybody in Utah has has the Princess Bride, the movie, absolutely memorized. We've all seen it like 100 times. I don't know why it's such a big cultural thing around here. But that
Yeah,
sounds
yeah.
amazing. That the venue is so cool. It's way more narrow and a lot more tall. I would argue you have to have a certain level of fitness just to get up to the entrance. That like
Yes,
pathway just to get there, let alone to get to your seat, is very steep. That was quite a schlep.
it is. And there are people who, it's just open to the public when there's not a concert going on. There are people who run up there and run the steps and run down the steps. I don't know how they do that. I mean, you get quite winded walking up to your
Yeah,
seat, even if you
yeah.
live here. If you're coming from out of town, be prepared.
Yeah, even more so. Yeah, where I'm sitting is about 4,700 feet, so it wasn't that big of a delta for me to get up there, but it was enough to be like, wow, you have to have some level of fitness to go to a concert there. But it must be an amazing experience being out there in that scenery. It just looks
Oh,
wonderful. The acoustics must be incredible. Like that
yeah.
must be a really cool place.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And you can look out over the city, you can see the clouds. Sometimes you get rained on, sometimes
Ugh,
you get hailed on, but the
amazing.
concerts go on.
Amazing. I love it. Oh, that's great. We mentioned in the introduction that you played collegiate basketball. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was kind of amazing. I played in the 90s. I was recruited to the University of Colorado from the DC area. And unfortunately, though, my senior year in high school, I tore my ACL, so I redshirted. And then my redshirt freshman year, so I was a sophomore in college, um, I played, and it was a wonderful season. We were as high as second in the nation. And during the Big Eight tournament, I tore my other ACL. So I missed the NCAA tournament that year. We were a number one seed. So it was an incredible experience, except that had I was just plagued with knee injuries. And so it kind of was disappointing that I couldn't, be my full basketball player self. But I still got to, live that life and get a free education and all that cool stuff.
Yeah.
and be with my teammates and travel all over the country. Um, it was a special time though. I wish I could go back and do it without injuries.
Yeah. Injuries would be so frustrating, especially of that nature. ACL is what, a year? You're kind of out, basically.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, and then once you kind of compromise your knee, you're more likely to maybe tear your MCL or maybe get some cartilage damage. So I've had 7 knee surgeries total.
Oh my goodness.
So I don't play basketball anymore,
I was gonna
unfortunately.
say, probably not the best sport anymore.
No, no. Swimming is my sport. Non-impact is my sport.
Yeah. Yeah. Good call. We also mentioned in the introduction that you went to school for microbiology and immunology. Were you always interested in those topics?
Well, it's funny because when I went to college, I either was going to be an engineer or a doctor. At that time, I chose engineer. So I was a chemical engineering major at the University of Colorado. And then I actually went out and was an engineer for a while. And I'm like, I think maybe I should try the other side. I think I should go do the doctor thing. But rather than MD, I started just taking some prerequisite classes and I became really fascinated with the immune system. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't need to go to med school. I want to go get my PhD. I was in New Mexico at the time, and I came back up here to the University of Colorado, the Health Sciences Center. So I felt like I was kind of returning home. Once I moved here to Colorado, I kind of knew I wanted to stay here. That's what happens to a lot of people. So it was nice I could come up here and do my PhD, studying immunology here in Denver.
Wow, that's amazing. Immunology, I mean, it's what an expansive topic, and I know a tiny fraction of what you know, I'm sure about it. But like, what was the thing that fascinated you the most about our immune system?
Well, I think the thing that fascinated me the most, and the thing that I actually did my dissertation on, was cell signaling. It's just amazing to me to think that each cell is just sitting there and it has all the kinds of receptors on its surface, so it can tell what's going on in its environment, right? And so there was this one inflammatory cytokine, TNF alpha, and interestingly enough, depending on where this cell called a macrophage is, where it was and what was around it, that signal could either cause the macrophage to activate and proliferate, or it would cause that macrophage to undergo programmed cell death, which is just basically a very, very neat way of killing itself and removing itself. Like, for instance, like after an immune response, you don't need all those white blood cells around. And so we were interested in figuring out, like, what is the difference? How does the cell know which way to go? Is it going to proliferate or is it going to die? And so we studied kind of the mechanisms of the cell signaling, from outside of the cell into the inside of the cell to kind of direct it, which is the proper response for this time in the course of an immune reaction.
Wow, absolutely fascinating.
It was fascinating.
Whenever I hear about a cell deciding whether to proliferate or kill itself, I'm wondering about cancer cells. Did your work ever take you into exploring different cancer cells and why they seem to continue to proliferate well beyond the fact that that they're benefiting themselves?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've never studied cancer cells themselves, but it's interesting because some cancer cells, their mutations are in those, cell death proteins. So it might get the signal to die, but the mutation causes it not to listen, I guess. Also, there are, just random mutations. There's the telomeres, the ends of the chromosomes are get shortened. So there's that was another thing too. Since I studied cell signaling, there's so many ways it could go wrong. And cancer is one of the ways it can go wrong, but you can have cancer from so many different ways. Um, but one of the things that really fascinated me about doing the research and studying is that so many things could go wrong, but for the most part, it doesn't.
I was just thinking that. That's crazy.
Right. And learning how complex everything is and how our cells work together, and how, a signal from the brain can do something in your foot. And then an infection in your foot will like cause cells, to go down there. I mean, it was just fascinating how everything worked together and how we were like walking around and alive.
That's so true. It is absolutely fascinating. I can understand and appreciate how you got so into that. What about
Mhm.
the evolutionary side of things? We know your book, the Origin of Being. You
Mhm.
you eventually took an interest in how, I'm assuming, how all of that in immunology also relates to how we evolved. How did that become an interest to you as
Well,
well?
actually, so I let's see. I think right in grad school about that time, I was interested in what I was doing and I enjoyed learning and doing the research. But personally, I felt like there was this disconnect. I was depressed. I didn't sleep well. I didn't exercise very much. I think this part of my story sounds kind of a lot like Luke's, where he's like, there was something off. And I wasn't necessarily living my best life or living the life I wanted to live. And so something that's always in the background underneath all this whole, engineering doctor thing, I always thought I had to be an engineer or a doctor, but no one ever said, and I never thought that I could be a writer. So that was kind of underneath everything. Um, and so when I had my kids, in 2010, it was a really good time. After I did a 5-year postdoc, it was just a really good time for me to step back from academia, um, and maybe explore some new options for my life because things weren't working for me. Um, and it was very interesting because actually started by writing middle grade fiction, which I don't know if you know what middle grade is. It's
I don't.
8 to 12-year-olds. So like before they, bigger than chapter books. So like they're actual books. But before you get to, YA and kind of stuff like that. So it's still, when kids are kind of innocent and exploratory and full of wonder and that kind of thing. That's what I like about that subgroup of children's books. So I actually have a few manuscripts of that, novels, of middle grade novels. And I was, looking around to find an agent, and I never, I was lots and lots of rejection letters. Um, but I was doing what I loved. But also at the same time, writers don't make a lot of money. So I was looking for a job, a side job that I could do. And I found an advertisement for Luke, because as you know, Luke really is interested in nutrition and he's writing nutrition books and has a nutrition company that he's starting up. He wanted to hire someone who could do research for him on nutrition. And I'm like, well, I'm not a nutritionist, but I know how to do research because of my background. And so I applied, and unfortunately, the very first thing he said when we were talking on the phone is, "Oh, I already found someone. I found a nutritionist to fill this position." So I was like, "Oh, well, darn." He's like, "But what about this idea?" He's like, I've been kicking this idea around because everything that he noticed about nutrition and not living in accord to our evolved natures applied to so many other things, not just what we were eating, but how we were sleeping, how we were working, our social groups, our child rearing. So were 10 different things that he had talked about that he wanted to kind of explore deeper. And what was fascinating was I was like, oh my gosh, this is what is wrong. This is that disconnect, that feeling of there's something missing here in my life. And I didn't know what it was. And so the more he talked, the more, and he was very enthusiastic about it. It was really contagious. But at the same time, I'm like, this is such an amazing opportunity, not only for me to use my scientific background, but to be a writer and to also learn all about this stuff that I didn't really know much about, but it really resonated deeply with me that this is what was missing, in my life, returning to how, I think a lot of the, you know, unhappiness and things that I have had in my life was because we weren't living in accord to our biology. Our world changed so fast, um, and our bodies and our minds are just struggling to keep up. And so I was able to research. I like to say, like, when I started this project, I'm like someone who's opening the book for the first time. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not, a geneticist. My specialty is immunology. Um, but I was able to, like, as I researched and wrote this book, I was really able to change my own life with it in certain ways. And so when you get to the end of it, it's like, and now it's published and it's out in the world. It changed my life in profound ways, not just the book itself and the research, but the process of writing the book, the process of getting it out in the world. It's just been an amazing opportunity for me to kind of latch on to something that I didn't know was wrong, but I knew something was wrong, and then be able to take it from its very infancy with Luke's vision and his, outlines and discussions to where it is today. It profoundly changed my life. So in health wise, but also just I had no idea this, when I quit my academia, research scientist job, I never expected I'd be a published author with a pop science self-help book. I mean, it just kind of just happened. And so that's kind of the story of how I got on to this project.
Wow.
And I've been so lucky. Luke's given me a lot of independence and trust. And I feel like it's just done wonders for my confidence and my, thinking about what I want to do with my life.
What a
So,
cool opportunity. Wow, very cool opportunity. The most powerful conversations we have around here are with people that, go through and they get a job or whatever, and like you with research, but then it's also changing your own day-to-day personal life and improving your own life for the better. So I'm so excited to talk to you about the confluence of those things in your life and what
mhm.
things changed, what things, made a big difference to you as you were discovering them. I want to ask you about the research itself. If I ask you to research immunology or microbiology, like the research has been done, right? We're doing it all the time and it's been done. And there's so much out there that we can look at that's even been done in the last 50 years or whatever. When we're looking at our evolution, it's so much more clouded. We have to make a lot more educated guesses about kind of how we evolved and what was going on and how we're able to tell, how people slept or what people ate. It's not necessarily like the randomized controlled trial was done
Right.
50,000 years ago in a group of hunter gatherers in
Mm.
the Levant or whatever. Like we don't have
Exactly.
that.
This is true.
What was the research process like for you, knowing that like you may have been used to going to PubMed and finding everything and it was there and more, I would assume, more like black and white versus, again, the research for how we evolved being a little bit more murky.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like if I was maybe doing this research 20 years ago, um, it would have been a lot more difficult. But I feel like the research on evolution, so many different disciplines are starting to kind of dovetail together. And that's primarily with the advent of genetic sequencing and learning about, we know what all the genes are in our bodies and what they do. And you can actually, based on DNA and mutations, you can actually be like, oh, well, this trait started evolving in this time. There's a lot more concrete um like timeline kind of things that people could put a stamp on because the anthropology and the genetics came together. So I really think that I came along at the right time to to maybe not have as much murkiness, but at the same time I still had to, I couldn't just go to an anthropology source. I would have to go to the anthropology source, and then they might cite, molecular biology source or a, sleep science um, journal article. Or, I mean, there's so many different disciplines that I had to kind of learn and read, and sometimes it felt like a rabbit hole. I couldn't. I read this article, but then that article would make me want to like get 20 more articles, and then each of those articles would make even more. So I it was complex in that way. All like you said, all the research was done. I didn't do any not new research for this except the way that Luke and I brought it together. um and so we think that might be kind of what's novel about our book, is just bringing all of these things from all these different disciplines together in a kind of a pop science, educational, but like lay people can easily understand the science, because we actually think that knowing and understanding this evolutionary process, knowing the why we do something rather than just like, oh, people are like, go get bright light in the morning, don't get light in the evening. Well, why? Why did that evolve? Why are we that way? I think it would really help people to make more lasting lifestyle changes, understanding the underlying reasons of how we got there. Um, and hopefully in the book, you can see by the time we get to talking about modern humans, you kind of already know what's wrong because you can see how we lived for hundreds of thousands of years as hunter-gatherers. And I mean, everyone could probably be like, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And then, yes, we talk about modern humans, and yeah, we have strayed so far to how we evolved to live.
Yeah.
And so hopefully having that deeper understanding will help lasting change happen.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's really well explained. I know when I'm listening to an anthropologist, ones that we've hosted on our show or other ones that maybe have a different opinion, I'm kind
Mhm.
of listening for those same things. There's some people that explain things and they'll say something, I'll be like, I'm not sure about that. And now we've got like 3 or 4 more questions. That doesn't match up with our biology, or maybe it doesn't match up with our digestive system, or there's something that doesn't quite ring true. The anthropologists who are able to answer questions that unify everything. And oh, that makes sense for our DNA. That also makes sense for our digestion. That makes sense why our shoulders work the way that they work, or why our
Oh,
vision
yeah.
is what it is. When they start checking a lot of boxes, I tend towards that as where I would want to get my information, because they can tie it all together in a way that really makes a lot more sense to me. And I definitely
Mhm.
understand going down rabbit holes of trying to uncover, like, why did this person say this? That doesn't, I don't know, like that would, I have a lot of questions for the people that aren't able to kind of tie everything together really well.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it is interesting because there are, different schools of thought and different, some people who are like, well, no, there's not mismatch. And there's people who are like, no, this is the paleo diet. No, this is the paleo diet. There's a lot of, I wouldn't call it controversy because that kind of thing in science is healthy because it challenges people to relook at their data or test something a different way, to actually figure out what is really the right thing. So it was interesting to see some of those controversies.
Sure.
So and try to incorporate it in a fact, so much out there about our health and well-being is confusing and so some things are contradictory. And so, we tried to present it in a way that was clear and didn't increase the confusion.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, you certainly did that. It's a very straightforward book and easy to understand. I love the illustrations in the book. You don't use tons and
Oh,
tons of them,
thanks.
but the ones that are there are really easy to understand. And I think they highlight the key points really well. I asked Luke the same question. You guys kind of started with sleep and the importance of sleep. What was it like doing the research specifically on sleep? How were you able to find out kind of what our evolutionary cycle was related to sleep? And with anything that we talk about today, as much of the like personal side of things that you want to add about, maybe how your sleep was, and you're doing this research, how is it changing your habits and behaviors? I'd also love to hear about that. But let's start with how you guys start in the book with sleep. Tell us what the research was like about that.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting because I was able to interview Dr. David Sampson, who is a primatologist who specializes on primate sleep. And his work and the interview I had with him, um, talk about going down more rabbit holes. But he really helped solidify in my mind, like kind of like what are the main issues that we need to address. And at that time, I knew all about like sleep hygiene, don't drink caffeine before bed, don't put your TV in your bedroom, all of those kind of things, but I never knew, why some of those things are. Um, so the more and like you said, with sleep, it's really hard to determine how our ancestors 100,000 years ago slept, right? You can't do a randomized controlled study with, people who don't exist anymore. Um, But there are modern day hunter-gatherers who have survived into the modern world, even though they're pushed to the fringes, they're still surviving. And so I've had access to studies on the actual people who live the way we used to live. And no matter where they were, in South America or in Africa, they had very, very similar sleep experiences. And so that kind of was like, oh, well, that's really cool. If you compare a hunter-gatherer group in South America and a hunter-gatherer group in Africa, and they're kind of at the same latitude, and they have the same sleep structure. They have the same daily cycles that they go through. That kind of is like that's an evolutionary conserved way to be. So in some instances in this book, when the research that we did was actually conducted on modern day hunter-gatherers, even though the caveats are they are influenced by the outside world, and their way of life is shrinking, and it's not how it used to be either, because like I said, they've been pushed to the fringes. So, but the thing that kind of tied it together, and the thing that Dr. Sampson is like, this is the key, is that because these hunter-gatherers and because our ancestors lived in nature, we were supremely attuned to the cycles of light and dark, as the earth rotates. And those are our circadian rhythms. And so these people did not sleep 12 hours a day. And, they didn't have like, oh, well, let's sleep 3 hours and then let's be up and then let's sleep 7 hours. They very much had, shorter on the order of 7 to 9 hours in bed. And so it's not that they slept longer. They also sometimes they didn't they didn't sleep very well. They would take naps to like make up the sleep debt. But they never had a word for what insomnia was. They didn't understand what insomnia was because no one ever really suffered from it. It was just they lived in nature. They were in tune with what was going on, light and dark, and they listened to what their body needed. When it was dark and it was time to go to bed, they went to bed. They didn't say, "Oh, just one more episode." "Oh, after just one more episode." They went to sleep when their body told them it was time to go to sleep. They went to sleep. So that was another thing that I think. So having everybody be in sync with their circadian rhythms is one thing, and then being in tune with what your bodies need. That was kind of a thread that kind of goes through all of the parts of our book. So in order to be in sync with your circadian rhythms, what do you need? You need to consistently wake up at the same time. You need to have bright sunlight in the morning because it's that bright sunlight that goes to this region in your hypothalamus that's kind of like the controlling clock for all the different parts of your body. That kind of resets it. And then at the same time, you get lots of light in the morning, but you don't want to get a lot of light after the sun goes down because that's not how we evolved. When the sun went down, the only light we would have was moonlight or firelight. None of this, up until 130 years ago or something, we didn't have an electricity. So this part of the change in how we're living really happened over 150 years. So that is not enough time for us to adjust.
Too soon. Way too soon.
Yeah. So lots of light in the morning, and then the falling light, and after dark, there's not very much light. Whereas today, we wake up and then we kind of have this twilight existence. We never get really bright sunlight because we're inside all the time. But then, as our light falls, the sun goes down, we get the same amount of light all throughout the day, all throughout the evening. And so it kind of tricks our body into thinking it's still daytime. Everything gets delayed. Our melatonin production gets delayed. And the circadian rhythm gets delayed. And so it's harder to wake up in the morning because you still have more melatonin in your system. It's harder to get up because the cortisol cycle hasn't been triggered to start and help you wake up and help you get going. Um, so that was just really cool for me to understand the relationship between light and sleep. Um,
Mm,
so and the other thing that was really interesting about this research that I didn't think about was that everyone's like, oh, there's night owls and there's early birds, and this is actually a very true thing. There's some people who can get up early and go to bed early, and that's just their rhythm. They need to stick to that rhythm. And there's some people who don't fall asleep till much later at night and they wake up, you know, and evolutionarily, that is a survival instinct. That's because Dr. Sampson would say, like, there was very few times in the middle of a night that everyone in the group was asleep.
yep.
So humans and the more advanced primates condense their sleep into shorter and shorter amounts, and they get in very deep sleep where they actually have trouble waking up. Um, there's a little bit of paralysis that actually goes on in some phases of our sleep. So the fact that people could be sentinels and warn somebody if there's a predator or something that's happening in and around where they're sleeping. Um, so Dr. Sampson said sometimes people who realize that it's some of these sleep cycle fluctuations are normal, people are like, oh, they can accept it. But the problem is our society is set up from work 9 to 5. When we were hunter-gatherers, we didn't have like work schedules like that. People could actually fit their day and fit the things they needed to do in the day within their natural rhythm. For the benefit of the entire group. And so thankfully, nowadays with Zoom and working from home and things like that, there are a lot more opportunities for people to find jobs that can align with their natural rhythms. And so I'm hoping that that's something that people can look into and embrace rather than being like, oh my gosh, I have insomnia. Um, if you eliminate all the other reasons for insomnia, maybe you just don't naturally fall asleep until later.
Yeah.
So sleep in, find a job that you can report to at 10, you know?
Yep.
Um, so that was another really interesting thing that I found out, that these variations of sleep are very adaptive for
Yeah.
humans.
That's amazing. I think it's a good thing for our listeners to remember next time they get frustrated with their teenage kids who's staying up until 4 in the morning and waking up at 1 in the afternoon. You can be like, well, at least the kid's awake. If a bear tries to come into our house or something, he'll be the first line of defense. So that's good.
Exactly.
That's good. I love how
Yeah.
you talked about the polarity of sleep and light. It's so important to say that like this should feel like a pendulum. You need to make this pendulum swing really hard, get big, bright blue light during the day, and then get way less muted, warm light that's low to the ground later on. That can help you set that clock and help you get really great, really efficient sleep. You may even
Mhm.
find that you don't need as much as you thought you did, and you're not tired during the day anymore because you're getting such a high quality. I'm curious, how did that change any of your own sleep practices?
Yeah, well, all of my devices turn to night shift at 4 o'clock. Um, I also have blue blocking glasses that I wear. They're so fashionable.
So
Um,
stylish.
I know, right? And I try to turn out lights around the house, and just basically kind of just tone everything down. Um, I'm not as good as not being on a screen until I go to bed. Sometimes, work is like the kids go to bed, I come down to work, and then I'm like, I gotta go to sleep. Um, but at least I try to make sure that my screens are all as low blue light as possible. And so
Yeah.
that has really helped. And since the pandemic, we got two dogs kind of during and after that. And now I walk them in the mornings. It's like uh, walking them in the mornings, getting that bright sunlight is just kind of part of my routine. So that's something that I've started doing as well, is just getting bright light in the morning by
And
walking the dogs.
that's great. And that gives you more energy during the day. Do you feel better than you used to because of that?
I think so. I feel like I don't have these wild swings. I go to bed at the same time every night usually, and I wake up at the same time usually. I still need to wake up to an alarm. Um, so I haven't quite gotten to that point yet where I wake up and naturally and feel fully rested, but I do feel like I have some habits that are like regular that I'm keeping. Um, that I think really help my tiredness, my health, all those factors just by maintaining, not rigid, but I am maintaining a schedule even on weekends.
Yeah, good for you. That's great. That can be really hard when Netflix comes out with a new season of Schitt's Creek or something that's just so addictive and wonderful to watch.
I know.
I understand. Giving up screens, like if I probably have a harder time getting people to try to turn off their screen earlier than I would like giving up sugar or something. Like it's a challenge.
It
So the
is.
things you mentioned, change the warming effect on your phone. Use blue light blockers. Like if you're not going to be perfect, that's okay, but there's steps you can do that will help mitigate the risk. The worst thing you want to do
Mhm,
is keep big, bright blue lights, especially late in
mhm,
the evening. So I love all of that. You guys in the book then kind of transition to talking about nutrition.
mhm.
Again, same kind of thing. I'm curious to know how the research was as far as how you were able to kind of determine what people were eating at certain periods. Was that, like you said, with the sleep thing, did you get a lot of clues from examining some of the tribes that we still have? Again, like you said, not many left that aren't being affected by
Mhm.
our stupid diet things that we're pushing on them now. But like,
Right.
were you able to use research on recent hunter-gatherer tribes to be able to determine where our diet should be and where we've gone wrong with that in the recent past?
Yeah, I think unlike sleep, there's a little bit more clue kind of in the archaeological record about different things that people were eating at different times. But again, a lot of data comes from um, the last 70 years of when people started realizing, oh, we need to study these groups because their way of life is fading from this world.
Yeah.
So but here, I think this is where I think the nutrition chapter is where there's the most, quote unquote controversy because, um, there's so many people out there who are like paleo diet, keto diet, all of these things. And it's funny because I read somewhere or somebody posted, you know, why are we arguing about what we should eat? What we need to do is come together as a united front and teach people what they shouldn't eat.
Mm,
And so rather than like, go to the mats about, keto, paleo, Mediterranean, different diets, take what we've learned from our ancestors and realize what we should not be eating. And I think that that in itself will take care of so many different problems if we can wean ourselves from the foods that we did not evolve to eat, especially things like completely made up things, trans fats, artificial sweeteners, artificial colors, artificial flavors. These things were never in our environment when we evolved to our nutrition. So, also these ultra processed foods, we never ate, we processed our food, but we always ate the whole food. We ate, the skins, we ate, the rinds, we ate, if you're talking about animal products, we ate the connective tissue and the organs and all of these things. We ate a whole food. We didn't just eat the sugar out of the food. We didn't just eat the processed, wheat, flour out of the food. Um, and so that is like another thing to remember, like the Industrial Revolution made it possible for us to feed lots more people, but it started stripping away the things that we used to always eat and refining it into something that had no evolutionary um or uh it was not in our evolutionary journey to learn how to take handle all this sugar, all these fake ingredients.
yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I agree with you 100% on the topic of like, why are we fighting over all these different diets when we can recognize some of those things that are so egregious to all of us? We could all just focus on getting that stuff out. And then
Mhm.
people could create whatever diet they wanted to based on how they were feeling, what their preferences were, that kind of thing. Excuse me. When I'm thinking of our evolution, as far as the things that we've eaten, you can give me input if you agree or disagree. I know you guys write about this in the book, but I think of like a vast majority of our evolution is hunter gatherer. There is a more gradual shift that happens depending on who you ask, 10 to 15,000 years ago, when we kind of start to do a little bit more agriculture, start to settle down a little bit more, less hunter gatherer. Again, that's a very gradual transition. That's
Mhm.
several generations. And depending on what culture you study, you can see that maybe they suffered a little bit of the consequence of that. Relying more on farming grains and how you had to protect land and all the things that didn't really matter to hunter gatherers now really mattered to agriculturalists and how that shifted. But what you're describing is the later kind of shift, the industrialization of our food, which this is a complete change, came out of nowhere. Our food is very highly modified. We're able to store it longer. Refrigeration comes along that helps. Packaging and boxes and bags and cans of this stuff that like you can eat it, but at the end of the day, is it even food? It's just like the sleep thing where like we have not adapted to lights. 150 years is not nearly enough to adapt to change in electricity and lights on 24 hours a day. Oh my goodness. I mean, we could talk the same thing about food. Like this is a very sudden shift in what we're eating. And when we're talking about all these different diets, it seems that everybody kind of forgets the standard American diet. That's kind of the fad diet. This is something we're trying as an experiment that isn't really going that well, especially when it comes to like chronic diseases that we're seeing just
Mhm.
go off the charts. It's crazy.
Yeah. So the agricultural revolution, I like how you kind of frame that. It was a much more gradual shift, just as more and more populations were adapting it as their method of food gathering. But I also think that when the people who started practicing agriculture, their lifespan actually went down at first because the variety of food shrank dramatically. They put all of their eggs in one basket, so to speak. So there was famine. If the crops didn't grow, there was famine. Um, Bringing all of these people together, really in really close quarters with animals, caused so many communicable diseases and things that just like wiped out swaths of people. Um, and also, the really interesting thing was now you need more in order to um, uh, cultivate the land, you need a lot of people. So the birth rate went up. Women were having babies every 1 to 2 years instead of every 5 years, 6 years. And the ones that made it to adulthood, like, oh, now we need more, there's more mouths to feed. So we need more land. Okay, let's clear more land. Let's have more people work the land. So all of these things changed not just what we ate, but how we approached living. Um, and how we started to approach nature in a different way. Though I would say up until about 200 years ago, most people were involved in their food development, like how they got food. We weren't so cut off and distant from the way our food is made, the way our food is grown. I think probably 200 years ago, most people were pretty close to food, our foodways in that way. Um, and we, like you said, we still ate the whole grain. We still ate the whole animal. We didn't waste a lot of things. And so, yeah, so here we are as hunter-gatherers, very stable. And then the agricultural revolution and then the industrial revolution, it's kind of
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
in terms of the rate of change.
Wow. I heard somebody recently say that they went to a barbecue and they were serving like chicken legs on the bone. And there were these two kids that were like, oh, wow, we didn't know chicken nuggets had bones in them. Like, this is a new food. Yeah, this is how it would have been. And, chicken wasn't even a big source of calories for us until very, very recently anyway.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah, that's all really interesting. You mentioned artificial sweeteners and colors, and we talked a little bit about sugar. In my mind, I think of three kind of primary kind of categories of things that I just mostly would say, like, these are the things you should probably just avoid. I want to see if you agree, disagree. The first one I would say is like refined sugar. We made sugar very cheap and expensive. We shipped it all over the planet. We consume vastly greater amounts now than we do than we did, even just a few hundred years ago. We know that,
Correct.
cavities are the most prevalent disease in the world. That would be my first thing. The second thing would be, the refinement of grains and roller mills that were able to extract everything, and leave just the white flour, and we could use that devoid of nutrition, turns to sugar in the blood very quickly. Probably not great either. The third thing I would think of as far as industrialization, and the third thing to probably avoid would be seed oils, what we call
Mhm.
vegetable oils. These were not in our diet 150 years ago. We learned how to hydrogenate them, like you mentioned earlier, turn them into trans fats,
Mhm.
harden them, then they made it into our food supply when they never should have, and we eat a ton of them. I think in the last 100 years, that's the one thing that has, exponentially, not, well, I guess exponentially increased based on it was zero 150 years ago, and now it's a huge part of the calories we eat today.
Mhm.
What do you think of those three things as being like, if you're avoiding those, you're probably doing an okay job?
No, I think those are the three things I would say. Most products on the shelves in grocery stores these days have refined sugar, refined grains, and refined oils in many different combinations, Um, and so and if we could just get back to eating the whole food instead of having apple juice, eat an apple. Because the other thing we haven't even talked about yet is how important fiber is to our bodies. Not only does it slow down our rate of absorption, it makes us feel full longer. And, nowadays there's this huge focus on the gut microbiome as being so critical in our overall health, mental and physical health, because the good gut microbiome contributes so much to, so many things to our system. And so giving our gut microbiome what they really need to chomp on and do what they need to do. Um, so eating whole foods, and avoiding ultra processed sugar, flour, and oils, that that's just right there in a nutshell. That's the easiest thing. Well, it's not easy because, like I said, 90% of the things in the grocery store are those three big things that we shouldn't eat. So we need to just kind of start shifting our, start eating, it's not, don't just go cold turkey. That's really overwhelming, but start eating less, like start making different choices when you go out to eat. Um, so I totally agree that that's the
Gotcha.
big three.
Gotcha. I do have to ask, in the context of somebody who eats in a style that I eat, and a large percentage of our listeners eat a largely carnivorous diet.
Mhm.
If I told you for 5.5 years, I have largely abstained from really any plant foods and have eaten a zero fiber diet, but I don't have any of the
Hmm.
other carbohydrate. I don't have any, like I have none. I don't eat any plant foods. Would that concern you that I'm not getting the fiber that other people do, or a lot of people that again are like listeners to the show that don't? It's
Yeah,
an
well, for
interesting
what,
topic.
yeah, for what I understand, I mean, the fiber is very important, but your point is that you mostly eat meat and fats and stuff, and not so many carbohydrates. The thing about the paleo diet is that there's not one paleo diet, right? There are people who survived, in the northern climates, in the really cold areas, who didn't have very many carbohydrates. They ate meat, they ate, animal products and, fat and protein. And their bodies have the enzymes to convert into things that they need. Um, at the other end of the spectrum, in the rainforests, it was the opposite. People would eat 80% plant foods, 85% plant foods, and very little animal foods. Um, and they were just fine as well. They were healthy and they thrived just the same way. So to think that there's just one way to eat, um, is not the right way to think, because even though we were a Paleolithic people and we had a Paleolithic diet, depending on where you were in the world, it was very different.
Yeah.
So I think different people will find that different styles of eating, if more meat-based, more plant-based, will do better for them. And you just have to figure out which one is right for you. But I think that most diets, the carnivore diet, the keto the paleo diet, the Mediterranean diet, all of those things do what the first thing those diets do is take away the processed sugar, take away the processed oils, take away the processed fruit. And so all of the diets that people are calling fad diets or whatever, they all want you to not eat the same things. They're just fighting over what you should eat. And I think what you should eat is something that's going to be different from person to person, um, and what you choose to do. So, um, but I do think, I mean, fiber I think is important. I don't know for sure. I don't study gut microbiome, and so that might be something that you would maybe be interested in looking at, because maybe if you're eating, if the animals that you're eating have healthy gut microbiome, then maybe some of that stuff comes into you as well. So I don't know. I'm not going to
It's a
answer.
fascinating. No, it's a fascinating topic, and I appreciate that you wanted to go there with that. I agree completely. Like, yeah, if I think if somebody is going to consume the carbohydrates, have the whole version of it with the fiber, with all the different things. You're right. When you process out just apple juice versus the apple, that is a totally different food stuff. So yeah, I think that's a great answer. I love that, and always just stay focused on the whole foods, whatever that is for the individual and what works really well for people. I'm curious to know, again, with you and your personal life, studying all of this stuff about,
Mhm.
what our Paleolithic ancestors ate. How did that change your own diet?
Yeah, well, I've definitely become more plant-based, but whole plant-based. And I'm not a vegetarian, but I don't eat red meat either, but I eat fish, chicken, eggs, cheese, dairy, all that stuff. Um, what I've found is what's really helped me is increasing my fiber has done wonders for me, because I not well and decreasing processed food, because I actually feel full for most of the day. I don't have cravings. I don't have like, I need sugar, I need sugar, I need sugar. Um, I actually feel, I don't know how to describe it. In the last, especially in the last 6 months, I have done a lot more. Like, I started doing things here or there, but now that my kids are older, it's a lot easier to do more stuff like this. But increasing fiber, increasing the plant foods that I eat have really made a big difference for me. So
Uh,
I've lost weight. Um, I've started doing weightlifting as part of I swim and I do like body pump classes, because in this doing lifting weights, using your muscles under load bearing is so important, as you probably talk about all the time on your podcast. Um, and it's more like how we evolved anyway. Like, we didn't just sit in chairs all day. We moved, we lifted our children, we hauled our carcasses, we hauled water, we were on our hands and knees, we were squatting, we were reaching, we were walking, we were running, we were doing all of these things, usually with something under load. And so the more you can emulate, you do have to, most people have to sit in a chair and do work, but being able to incorporate some of those other things in their regular day-to-day thing is so important.
so important. Yeah, absolutely, so important. As you're describing how you're like feeling that lack of hunger, a term that I hear a lot of times is people feel food freedom. Would that be a good way you would kind of describe like it's like, yeah, I love the food that I eat, but if I miss a meal, it's not the end of the world, or I'm not getting hangry all the time. My mood isn't swinging. My blood sugar isn't like fluctuating. Would that be a way that you would kind of maybe
Well,
describe how you feel?
I really like that, food freedom, because I really don't have, normally sitting here writing or doing, working on social media stuff, I'd be like, oh, I want some chips, or I want, and then you'd eat something and then it would just make you spiral into wanting more and wanting more and wanting more. And when I eat a meal nowadays, it has, I don't know, 15 different plants in it, and it has sources of protein, from salmon or chicken. I had some, turkey today. Um, I feel full, and I'm not thinking about what I need to eat next. I'm not thinking about, there's no signal going to my brain that is like freaking out. Like, low blood sugar, you're gonna, you're hungry, you need food. There's nothing, none of that going on. So freedom is a great word for that.
It's such a great feeling, like where you were always tied to snacks, or I always needed like a granola bar or the yogurt snack. Like between my clients, if it had been like 2 or 3 hours or whatever, like to feel like, oh, okay, I can go do stuff. I don't
Mhm.
necessarily need to be consuming all the snacks all the time and the
Yeah.
processed food. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's
I
cool that you
used to
noticed that.
have kind of low blood sugar moments, the hangry moments, I guess, where you'd feel like you kind of get sweaty and a little bit, kind of, whoa, the world is kind of spinning a little bit. That has stopped completely. I used to get indigestion, heartburn all the time, and that has stopped completely.
Wow.
Um, and so I think it's a combination of getting rid of the processed foods, sugars, flours, and oils, and adding whole foods has totally changed. I mean, it's changed my mind too. I've suffered from depression a lot in my life, and I feel like I'm not fighting against that. And I
Ah,
think it's because of, what I'm doing, what I'm eating, and what I'm doing with my body. Um, and so it's been a huge, like I said at the beginning, not only was the process of writing this book and publishing it and being out in the world totally life changing, but being able to actually, put some of these things into action. We got to walk the walk. We can't just talk the talk. Walking the walk is
yeah.
actually how things get done. And what's really interesting, and this is probably going into too much detail, but when I was writing the book, I would learn all these things, but I felt so overwhelmed by all of the things that were wrong, that all the things that we needed to do differently, all the things that I would see in myself. Like, I do that, darn it. I'd sort of get down on myself a little bit. So while I was writing the book, it was a little overwhelming. And I wasn't able to start implementing some of these things until it was done and edited, and we had these points. And we made these sections in the book. And so the way that we edited it and started explaining it in the actual book that got published, that is what started making me be able to make some of these changes, because I think it's overwhelming to see all the things that are wrong. But taking one small step, that the easiest step that for you to take, um, do that, So for me, that was okay. I'm not going to eat processed food. I can do that. Like, I have lots of, like, I have an apple in my purse. If I need a snack, I'm gonna eat an apple. Um, so that was kind of the first thing in terms of nutrition. With sleep, go to bed at the same time. It was hard to stop myself from like wanting a little bit more, being awake, having me time. But once after a couple of weeks of just I'm going to bed at 10:30, or I'm asleep by 10:30. It just became easier and easier. And then once you make that one change, once I stopped making eating processed foods, I feel so much better. So I don't feel so overwhelmed by life. So now I can take another step, because now the not eating processed foods is a habit, and I know it's a habit that makes me feel good. And so now I'm ready to take the next one. And that was increasing fiber and eating more plants in my case. Um, and then that made me feel so much better. And so now I'm like, well, I go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. I swim and I do body pump. And I do that because I feel better and I actually want to go. It's not like, oh, I gotta go. And then you drag yourself there and you don't feel good while you're doing it. You're a little nauseated, your muscles are kind of fatigued. And but because I'm doing these things underneath, just the foundational stuff that I need to do to support my body, it's easier to go work out.
Yeah.
Um,
That is such great advice.
yeah, so
Such
maybe
great advice.
taking little steps, and then watching for how those little steps are changing your body and your outlook and your brain. And then you're like, oh, it's going to be easier to make more and more changes as you go along.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's something that I wish more people would understand. Is it feels overwhelming, like you were just describing, but just start with the easiest thing, whatever is like laughably simple and easy for you to do. Start there, get a little win, and you'll be more willing to get the next one and the next one and the next one. And all the while you're feeling better. So it's not a sacrifice to do all these things. It's actually
Yeah.
rewarding you as you go. You're getting more energy. And so you can do more with that energy. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to contrast. I don't know what you have, if you've reflected on this or thought about this, but I think back to you and your collegiate career and performing at a really high level. And, we kind of think that athletes have the best diets and they're all dialed in. And I'm willing to bet that if we look back on what you were actually eating in college, what I was eating in college when I was, skating and playing ice hockey was absolutely terrible. And I think back at all the injuries, all my
Mhm.
niggling things that I don't deal with anymore, but I was dealing with then. Is it interesting to kind of contemplate, you know, a bit of the frustration with the injuries and the ACLs. We know that that's on the rise with kids younger and younger and
Mhm.
younger these days, and
Yeah.
how some of these things, like if you had known about nutrition or about sleep, how that may have changed that trajectory, and maybe you could have competed without getting hurt. It's
Yeah.
interesting to
Well,
reflect on.
I I think going back, if I go back and look at it like from a nutritional standpoint, which I haven't really done that much before, but I'd be like, yeah, I wasn't eating very well. I mean, we'd have training table, we'd have, pregame meals and things like that, and those were always healthy choices. But then outside of that, you know, you would just go to the cafeteria and have sugary cereal, for breakfast and sugary cereal for lunch. Um, but I think the the thing that I look back on and I think that's changed the most, or I wish I had known now, was the mind body piece. Um, I felt like they were separated. Like my body was the thing that got everything done. I lifted the weights, I ran this, I did sprints, I went to practice every day, I played in games, and I didn't take care of my mental health. It was not something necessarily that athletes, it was a stigma for a really long time, kind of the mental health. I'm so thankful that there are athletes, really prominent athletes, who are like, my mental health is suffering. I need to take a step back. Um, and so that for me, that's like more thinking of the body in a more holistic way, which I've been doing in the last 7 years, especially in the last year, where I've started to see a lot, all of these little small changes are starting to snowball, and how it really is, everything is connected. I'm not just a body and my brain, you know, how my brain feels is going to affect my body, and how my body feels is going to affect my brain. Especially after getting injured and then having all of this mental trauma about not being able to play, or having to sit out, or not being the basketball player that I could have been. And so, but I didn't have any way to address that in a healthy way. So when I look back at my collegiate career, the one thing I wish I had been able to focus on or to realize is that I need to take care of myself holistically,
Mm.
um, and not just one for the sake of the other,
Yeah, I love
or
that.
in
That's
spite
such
of the other.
Yeah, such a great answer. I love that. And you're right. We are so grateful that that's becoming more of a conversation. Even, 5, 10 years ago, to talk about mental health with athletes in particular, or all of us, it would have been so much more stigmatized than it is today. So I think it is going in the right direction, and getting some of those health pieces, like you said, like, taking care of the body takes care of the mind and vice versa. I couldn't agree more. I think that's all been really wonderful and very good practical advice. Is there anything that you'd like to highlight from the book that you'd want to mention now?
From in what capacity or in what way? Just in what I
Just
just talked about?
yeah, just anything else you want to mention from the book, on the origin of being, that you're really proud of, or something that was maybe like overlooked in this conversation.
Oh, yeah. So I one of the main things that attracted me to this project when I was talking to Luke was the nature piece, because that was one of the places where I was feeling a huge disconnect. And that's when climate change was starting, this is back in, 2010s. Um, but way even before that, I was starting to I was starting to suffer mentally from what I would see around me with nature. And so the nature chapter was one of the main reasons, or the nature part is one of the main reasons I took the job. And it was the first chapter, the first part that I wrote. And it means so much to me because I've been able to, um, my connection with nature, my connection with people who feel like I do, trying to live more sustainably. All of these things have also helped my mental health as well because I'm addressing the things that I used to be so afraid of, um, what was going on in the world. So we didn't get to touch on the nature chapter, but I really that was the one that really was in my heart. And I was already doing a lot of the things that we recommend that people do. Unlike some of the other chapters where all of these things are kind of new to me, the nature chapter felt more like, okay, I'm doing the right things. I need to get my mental health and my physical health to the place where I can start addressing all of these things without being overwhelmed and without being depressed.
Yeah, I love that. Well, now the listener's going to have to go out and buy the book. That's the only way they're going to be
Yeah.
able to get the chapter is go get the book. Like I said, so grateful that you guys were able to send it to me. I thought it was a very valuable resource. I think it's really easy to understand and it ties a lot of things together. Like you said, the unique part about what you guys have done is not necessarily like unique research, but tying it all together and being able to tell that story in a way that can help a lot of people marry those two kind of things, the way that we evolved and the way we are today. You know, we've lived in a certain condition that we don't live in anymore, and now we have again Netflix and iPhones, and how can we blend those two things together the best we can
Yeah.
is the challenge. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate the job you guys did in writing the book.
Thank you
Really
so
appreciate
much.
you taking the time to do this interview today. It was really great to get to know you a little bit better. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, so our website is www.ontheoriginofbeing.com. And so there's different things on that website. You can order the book from there. There's excerpts from the book and lots of different things. I am on, or we have a Instagram account at On the Origin of Being. It's also the same thing on Facebook at or On the Origin of Being. And then Luke and I both have our personal Facebook, and I have a personal LinkedIn that we sometimes post on too. But I'd say that I am most active on Instagram.
Excellent. We will link that in the show notes. Jenny Powers, this has been an awesome conversation. Like I said, we're so grateful for you and all of your research and all the information that you got and put out in this book. Thank you so very much for everything that you do. And thank you for time to being on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Casey. I had a really good time.
Good. So did I. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.